The morning sun was just breaking through the clouds when William's phone rang. He was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking his usual black coffee and reading the newspaper. The sound of his phone buzzing made him look up from the sports section. "Hello?" he answered, not recognizing the number on his screen. "Is this William Thompson?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded professional, like someone from an office. "Yes, this is William. Who is this?" "Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Margaret. She was brought in about 30 minutes ago." William's coffee cup slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor. The hot liquid splashed across his bare feet, but he didn't even notice the burning sensation. "What happened? Is she okay?" His voice was shaking now. "Sir, I can't give you details over the phone. You need to come to the hospital right away. She's in the emergency room." William didn't remember hanging up the phone. He didn't remember putting on his shoes or grabbing his car keys. The next thing he knew, he was running to his old blue truck in the driveway. His hands were trembling so badly that it took him 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. Margaret had left the house just 2 hours earlier to go grocery shopping. She did this every Tuesday morning, the same routine they had followed for 23 years of marriage. She would make a list on Sunday, check it twice on Monday, and then head to Miller's Market on Tuesday at 8 o'clock sharp. "Be careful driving," William had called out to her as she grabbed her purse and shopping bags. She had turned around and smiled at him, that same beautiful smile that had made him fall in love with her when they were both 19 years old. "I'm always careful, you old worrywart," she had laughed, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek before walking out the door. Now, as William drove through the quiet streets of their small town, those words kept playing in his head. Margaret was always careful. She was the most careful driver he knew. She never talked on her phone while driving, never drove too fast, and always stopped completely at stop signs. So what could have happened? The drive to the hospital normally took 15 minutes, but William made it in 8. He didn't care about speed limits or traffic lights. All he could think about was getting to Margaret. His heart was pounding so hard in his chest that he could hear it over the sound of his truck's engine. St. Mary's Hospital was a small building on the edge of town. William had only been there twice before. Once when his father had a heart attack 5 years ago, and once when Margaret had gotten food poisoning from a restaurant. Both times everything had turned out fine. His father had recovered completely, and Margaret had been back to normal in just 2 days. But this felt different. The nurse on the phone had sounded serious, almost worried. That scared William more than anything else. He parked his truck in the first space he saw and ran toward the hospital entrance. The automatic doors seemed to move too slowly, so he squeezed through them before they were fully open. The smell of disinfectant and cleaning supplies hit him immediately, making his stomach feel sick. The emergency room waiting area was small and painted a boring beige color. There were about 15 plastic chairs arranged in rows, and a television mounted on the wall was playing some morning talk show with the sound turned down low. Only 3 other people were waiting: an elderly man holding an ice pack to his wrist, a young woman with a crying baby, and a middle-aged man who was reading a magazine. William rushed to the reception desk, where a woman with short gray hair was typing on a computer. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "I'm looking for my wife," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Margaret Thompson. Someone called me and said she was brought here." The woman looked at her computer screen and typed Margaret's name. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. She's with the doctors right now. If you could just have a seat, someone will be out to talk to you soon." "Can I see her? Is she okay? What happened?" "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have those details. The doctor will speak with you as soon as possible. Please, just take a seat and try to stay calm." Stay calm? How was he supposed to stay calm when he didn't know what had happened to the most important person in his life? William wanted to demand answers, to push past the reception desk and find Margaret himself, but he knew that wouldn't help anyone. He chose a chair in the corner where he could see the doors that led to the treatment rooms. Every few minutes, a nurse or doctor would come through those doors, and William would sit up straighter, hoping they were coming for him. But they always walked past him to speak to someone else. The minutes felt like hours. William kept looking at the clock on the wall, watching the second hand move slowly around the circle. He tried to think positive thoughts, to remember all the good times he and Margaret had shared. Their wedding day, when she had looked so beautiful in her white dress. The day they had bought their little house on Maple Street. The vacations they had taken to the ocean every summer. But his mind kept wandering to darker places. What if Margaret was seriously hurt? What if she was... No, he couldn't think about that. She was strong and healthy. She exercised every day, ate her vegetables, and took her vitamins. She would be fine. She had to be fine. A man sitting across from him was reading a newspaper, and William could see the headlines about a car accident on the front page. His heart started racing again. Had Margaret been in a car accident? She was such a good driver. But what about the other drivers on the road? There were too many people who drove while looking at their phones, or who drove too fast, or who ran red lights. William realized he was breathing too fast and feeling dizzy. He put his head between his hands and tried to slow down his breathing. An older woman sitting nearby noticed his distress. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked kindly. "My wife?" William managed to say. They won't tell me anything." "I'm sure she's in good hands," the woman said softly. "The doctors here are very good. My husband had surgery here last year, and they took excellent care of him." William nodded and tried to smile at the kind stranger, but he couldn't manage it. He kept staring at those doors, waiting for someone to come out and tell him what was happening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 45 minutes, the doors opened and a tall man in a white coat walked out. He looked around the waiting room and then walked directly toward William. "Mr. Thompson?" the doctor asked. William stood up so quickly that he felt dizzy again. "Yes, that's me. How is my wife? What happened?" "I'm Dr. Martinez," the man said, extending his hand. "Let's sit down and talk." Those words made William's blood run cold. In all the movies and television shows he had ever watched, when a doctor said, "Let's sit down and talk," it was never good news. But he followed Dr. Martinez to a quiet corner of the waiting room and sat down in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "Mr. Thompson, your wife was involved in a collision this morning at the intersection of Main Street and Oak Avenue," Dr. Martinez began. "She was conscious when the paramedics arrived, which is a good sign." William felt a tiny bit of relief. At least Margaret was conscious. That had to mean something good. "However," the doctor continued, and William's heart sank again at that word, "she has sustained some injuries that we're still evaluating. She has a concussion, which means she hit her head during the accident. She also has some bruising on her ribs, but the x-rays show they're not broken." "Can I see her?" William asked immediately. "In just a few minutes," Dr. Martinez replied. "But there's something else we need to discuss first." William waited, his hands gripped tightly together in his lap. "During our examination, we discovered something unusual. We always do a full body scan when someone comes in after an accident just to make sure we don't miss any internal injuries. The scan showed something that wasn't caused by the car accident." "What do you mean?" William's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Martinez took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Thompson, the scan revealed a mass in your wife's abdomen. It appears to be quite large, and it's in a location that suggests it's been growing for some time." William felt like the room was spinning around him. "A mass? What kind of mass?" "We can't be certain without more tests, but we believe it may be a tumor. We've already called in our oncology specialist, Dr. Kim, and she'll want to do additional scans and possibly a biopsy to determine exactly what we're dealing with." The word tumor hit William like a punch to the stomach. He felt sick and dizzy and confused all at once. But Margaret feels fine. She's never complained about any pain. She just had a physical exam 2 months ago and her doctor said everything looked normal. That's not unusual, Dr. Martinez explained gently. Many tumors don't cause symptoms until they become quite large. And depending on where they're located, they might not be detected during a routine physical exam. William put his head in his hands. This morning, his biggest worry had been whether his favorite baseball team would make the playoffs. Now, in the span of just a few hours, his whole world had been turned upside down. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, not sure he really wanted to hear the answer. "We're going to do everything we can to help her," Dr. Martinez said. "But I want to be honest with you. We need to do more tests before we can give you any definitive answers about her prognosis. What I can tell you is that if it is cancer, catching it now gives us more options for treatment." William nodded, though he wasn't really processing the doctor's words. His mind was still stuck on the fact that Margaret might have cancer. Sweet, healthy Margaret, who had never smoked a cigarette in her life, who ate salads for lunch every day and went for walks around the neighborhood every evening. "The most important thing right now," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that your wife is stable and comfortable. The injuries from the car accident are minor and will heal completely. We're more concerned about this mass we've discovered." "When will you know for sure?" William asked. "When will you know if it's cancer? Dr. Kim wants to do an MRI this afternoon to get a better picture of what we're dealing with. Depending on what that shows, we may schedule a biopsy for tomorrow or the next day. Once we have a tissue sample, we should have definitive answers within a week." A week. 7 whole days of not knowing whether his wife had cancer. 7 days of worrying and waiting and trying to pretend everything was normal. William didn't know how he was going to get through even the next 7 minutes, let alone 7 days. "Can I see her now?" he asked again. "Of course," Dr. Martinez said, standing up. "But I should warn you, she's still a bit groggy from the pain medication we gave her, and she has some bruising on her face from the airbag. She looks worse than she actually is." William followed the doctor through the doors he had been staring at for the past hour. They walked down a long hallway lined with rooms on both sides. He could hear the beeping of machines and the quiet conversations of nurses and other medical staff. Dr. Martinez stopped at room number 7 and knocked gently on the door before opening it. "Margaret, your husband is here to see you?" William stepped into the room and saw Margaret lying on a narrow bed with white sheets pulled up to her chin. Her face was bruised and swollen, especially around her left eye, and there was a bandage on her forehead. But she was awake and alert, and when she saw him, she tried to smile. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice sounding tired and a little confused. "I'm sorry I worried you." William rushed to her bedside and gently took her hand in both of his. "Don't apologize. I'm just so glad you're okay." But even as he said those words, William knew that nothing was really okay. The woman he loved more than anything in the world might have cancer, and he had no idea how to handle that possibility. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked softly. Margaret squeezed his hand. "I was driving to the store, and the next thing I remember, I was here. The nurses said someone ran a red light and hit my car." William nodded. "But you're going to be fine. The doctors are taking good care of you." "I feel so tired," Margaret said, "and my head hurts." "That's normal," Dr. Martinez said from the doorway. "The medication we gave you for pain will make you sleepy. We're going to keep you here overnight just to monitor your concussion." Margaret looked confused. "Overnight? But I need to make dinner, and I never finished the grocery shopping." "Don't worry about any of that," William said quickly. "I can pick up groceries later. Right now, you just need to rest and get better." Dr. Martinez stepped closer to the bed. Mrs. Thompson, we're also going to do some additional tests this afternoon just to make sure the accident didn't cause any internal injuries we might have missed. William caught the doctor's eye and nodded slightly. They had agreed that they wouldn't tell Margaret about the mass until they knew more about what it was. There was no point in worrying her until they had more information. "What kind of tests?" Margaret asked. "Just some scans," Dr. Martinez replied calmly. "Very routine after an accident like this. Nothing to worry about." Margaret nodded and closed her eyes. "I'm so tired," she murmured. "Sleep," William said, stroking her hair gently. "I'll be right here when you wake up." As Margaret drifted off to sleep, William sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to her bed. He watched her chest rise and fall with each breath, grateful that she was alive and relatively unhurt from the accident. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Martinez had told him: a mass, a tumor, possibly cancer. 3 words that had the power to change everything. William barely left Margaret's side for the next 24 hours. He slept in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed, ate terrible hospital food from the cafeteria, and watched as nurses came in every few hours to check her blood pressure and temperature. Margaret seemed to be recovering well from the car accident. The swelling on her face was going down, and she was more alert and talkative. She complained about the hospital gown being too thin and asked William to bring her crossword puzzle books from home. "I feel fine," she kept telling the nurses. "When can I go home?" But William knew that the real test was still coming. Dr. Martinez had scheduled the MRI for Wednesday afternoon, and William was dreading it. Every time he thought about what the scan might reveal, his stomach would clench up and he would feel like he couldn't breathe properly. He tried to act normal around Margaret, but it was the hardest thing he had ever done. When she asked him why he looked so worried, he would force a smile and say he was just concerned about her concussion. "You're such a worrier," Margaret would laugh, the same thing she had said to him for 23 years. "I'm tougher than I look." Tuesday evening, Margaret's sister Linda came to visit. Linda lived about an hour away and had driven over as soon as William called her about the accident. She brought flowers from her garden and Margaret's favorite chocolate chip cookies. "You look terrible," Linda told Margaret with a smile. "But I've seen you look worse." "Thanks a lot," Margaret laughed. "You're supposed to tell me I look beautiful and brave." "You do look brave," Linda said, sitting down on the edge of the bed, "but definitely not beautiful right now." William watched the 2 sisters joke with each other. And for a few minutes, he almost forgot about the mass that the doctors had found. Margaret seemed so normal, so much like herself. How could someone who was laughing and making jokes possibly have cancer? But late that night, after Linda had gone home and Margaret was asleep again, William found himself staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the things he didn't know. He didn't know anything about cancer or tumors or oncology. He didn't know what treatments were available or what Margaret's chances would be if the mass turned out to be malignant. He quietly got up from his chair and walked down the hallway to the hospital's information center. It was closed, but there was a computer available for visitors to use. William had never been comfortable with computers, but he managed to figure out how to search the internet. For the next 2 hours, he read everything he could find about abdominal tumors and cancer treatment. Most of what he read scared him terribly. There were statistics about survival rates and descriptions of chemotherapy side effects that made him feel sick to his stomach. But he also read stories about people who had been diagnosed with cancer and had gone on to live full, healthy lives. There were new treatments available that hadn't existed even 5 years ago. There was reason to hope. When he finally went back to Margaret's room, she was awake and looking around for him. "Where did you go?" she asked. "I woke up and you weren't here." "Just to the bathroom," William lied, settling back into his chair. "How are you feeling?" "My head doesn't hurt as much," Margaret said. "And I'm hungry. That's a good sign." "Right?" "That's a very good sign," William agreed. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cloudy. Margaret had her blood drawn early, and a different doctor came in to examine her. Dr. Kim, the oncology specialist, introduced herself as someone who was helping with Margaret's case. "I understand you're feeling much better today," Dr. Kim said pleasantly. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Much better," Margaret confirmed. "When can I go home?" "We'd like to do one more scan this afternoon, just to make sure everything looks good internally," Dr. Kim explained. "It's routine after an accident like yours." William admired how calm and professional Dr. Kim sounded. She didn't give any hint that there was anything unusual about the scan she was ordering. "What kind of scan?" Margaret asked. "An MRI. It's similar to the CT scan you had when you first arrived, but it gives us more detailed pictures. You'll lie on a table that slides into a machine and it takes pictures of your abdomen and chest. It's completely painless, though some people find the machine a little noisy." "How long does it take?" Margaret wanted to know. "About 45 minutes, Dr. Kim replied. "Your husband can wait in the room right next to the MRI suite, so you'll know he's nearby." After Dr. Kim left, Margaret turned to William. "She seems nice. I like her better than that first doctor we met." William nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Dr. Kim did seem nice, but he couldn't stop thinking about why an oncology specialist was involved in Margaret's care. Oncology meant cancer. Why would they need a cancer doctor if they were just checking for injuries from the car accident? The morning passed slowly. Margaret watched television and worked on a crossword puzzle. William tried to read a magazine, but he couldn't concentrate on any of the words. His mind kept wandering to what the afternoon would bring. At 2 o'clock, a technician came to take Margaret for her MRI. William walked with them to the radiology department and watched as Margaret was wheeled into a room with a large white machine that looked like a giant donut. "I'll be right here," he called out to her before the door closed. William sat in the waiting area outside the MRI suite, listening to the loud knocking and buzzing sounds the machine made as it took pictures of his wife's body. Each sound seemed to go on forever. He kept looking at his watch, counting down the minutes until the test would be over. Finally, after nearly an hour, the door opened and Margaret was wheeled out on the table. She was smiling and looked relieved. "That wasn't too bad," she said. "Just noisy, like Dr. Kim said. When do we get the results?" "The radiologist will look at the images this afternoon," the technician explained. "Your doctor should have the results by tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. Another night of waiting and worrying. William didn't know how much more of this uncertainty he could handle. They went back to Margaret's room, and she settled in for a nap. The sedative they had given her for the MRI was making her sleepy. William sat in his chair and watched her sleep, studying her face for any signs of illness that he might have missed before. She looked pale, but that could be from spending 2 days in the hospital. She had lost a little weight recently, but she had been trying to lose weight for the past few months. Were these signs that something was wrong? Or was he just looking for problems that weren't there? Around 5 o'clock, Dr. Martinez stopped by to check on Margaret. She was awake by then and feeling much better. "The good news is that your concussion symptoms seem to be resolving nicely," he told her. "Your reflexes are normal, and you don't seem to be having any issues with memory or confusion." "So I can go home?" Margaret asked hopefully. "We'll see what tomorrow brings," Dr. Martinez said diplomatically. "We want to make sure all of your test results look good before we discharge you." After the doctor left, Margaret turned to William with a puzzled expression. "Why does everyone keep talking about test results? I thought they were just checking for injuries from the accident. What kinds of test results are they waiting for?" William felt his heart start racing. He wasn't good at lying to Margaret. In 23 years of marriage, he had never kept any important secrets from her. They told each other everything, shared all their worries and fears and dreams. But how could he tell her that the doctors had found a mass that might be cancer when he didn't even know for sure what it was yet? What if it turned out to be nothing serious? He would have worried her for no reason. "I think they just want to be extra careful," he said, which was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. You know how doctors are. They want to run every test they can think of. Margaret seemed to accept this explanation. "I suppose that's better than them missing something important," she said. "But I really want to go home. I miss our bed and our kitchen and our garden." "Soon," William promised, hoping that was true. That evening, Linda came back to visit, bringing Margaret's nightgown from home and some books she had requested. She also brought William a change of clothes and some of his favorite snacks. "You look exhausted," Linda told William when Margaret was distracted by the television. "When was the last time you went home?" "I'm not leaving," William replied firmly. "Margaret needs me here." "She needs you to take care of yourself too," Linda said. "Go home tonight, take a shower, sleep in your own bed, bring back some of her things." "I'll stay with her." William wanted to refuse, but he had to admit that he felt terrible. He hadn't showered in 2 days, and his back ached from sleeping in the hospital chair. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe he would be more help to Margaret if he took a few hours to rest and clean up. "Are you sure you don't mind staying?" he asked. "Of course not. We can have a sister's night. I'll paint her nails and we can watch old movies." William looked at Margaret, who was already looking more cheerful at the prospect of spending time with her sister. "Go," Margaret said, waving her hand at him. "Linda's right. You smell like hospital disinfectant." So William finally left the hospital for the first time in 2 days. The drive home felt strange and surreal. Everything looked exactly the same as it had on Tuesday morning when he had rushed out to come to the hospital, but somehow the world felt completely different. His house seemed too quiet and too empty. Margaret's coffee cup was still sitting on the kitchen counter where she had left it Tuesday morning. Her shopping list was still stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. The newspaper he had been reading when he got the phone call was still spread out on the kitchen table. William picked up Margaret's coffee cup and washed it carefully, then put it back in its usual place in the cabinet. He threw away the old newspaper and wiped down the kitchen table. These small, normal tasks made him feel a little better. He took a long, hot shower and put on clean clothes. He packed a bag for Margaret with some of her own pajamas, her favorite soap, and the mystery novel she had been reading. He also grabbed the photo from their bedside table, a picture of the two of them from their anniversary dinner last year. Before leaving to go back to the hospital, William sat down at his kitchen table and tried to prepare himself for what tomorrow might bring. Dr. Kim would have the results from the MRI by morning. By this time tomorrow, they would know whether Margaret had cancer or not. Either way, their lives were about to change. If the mass turned out to be benign, they would be grateful and relieved, but they would always remember this scare. If it was cancer, they would face the biggest challenge of their marriage. William thought about all the promises he had made to Margaret on their wedding day. In sickness and in health, for better or for worse. At the time, those had just been words in a ceremony. He had never really thought about what they would mean in real life. Now he was about to find out. He drove back to the hospital through the quiet streets of his town, passing the intersection where Margaret's accident had happened. There were still some skid marks on the pavement and broken glass in the gutter. Such a small thing, someone running a red light, had led to such a big discovery. When he got back to Margaret's room, he found her and Linda laughing at something on the television. Margaret's nails were painted a bright pink color, and she looked more like herself than she had since the accident. "Feel better?" Margaret asked when she saw him. "Much better," William said, kissing her forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Good. Linda brought me some real food from that deli I like. Hospital food is terrible." "The nurses said you can start eating normal food tomorrow if everything looks good," Linda reported. William sat down in his chair and tried to focus on the comedy show that Margaret and Linda were watching. but his mind kept wandering to the conversation he would have with Dr. Kim in the morning. In about 12 hours, he would know the truth about what was growing inside his wife's body. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. Margaret fell asleep around 10 o'clock, and Linda left shortly after. William settled into his chair for another night of watching Margaret sleep and thinking about tomorrow. But this time, instead of reading scary information on the internet, he found himself thinking about all the good memories he and Margaret had made together. Their first apartment, which was so small they could barely fit a table in the kitchen. The day they had bought their house and spent the whole weekend painting the living room. The vacations they had taken to different states, always finding small museums and local restaurants to explore. They had built a good life together. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, just like they had faced everything else for the past 23 years. William must have dozed off sometime after midnight, because he was awakened by the sound of nurses coming in for Margaret's early morning blood pressure check. Margaret was awake, too, looking more rested than she had since the accident. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said to William. "Ready to go home today?" "I hope so," William replied, though he knew that going home would depend on what Dr. Kim had to tell them about the MRI results. After breakfast, which Margaret ate with enthusiasm, Dr. Kim appeared in the doorway. She looked serious, but not grim. William couldn't tell from her expression whether the news was good or bad. "Good morning," Dr. Kim said pleasantly. "How are you feeling today, Margaret?" "Ready to go home," Margaret replied immediately. "Well, I have the results from your MRI, and I'd like to discuss them with both of you," Dr. Kim said, pulling up a chair so she could sit close to the bed. William felt his heart start pounding again. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. Dr. Kim opened a folder and pulled out several large sheets of paper that looked like photographs. William could see gray and black shapes on them, but he had no idea what any of it meant. "The MRI confirmed what we saw on the initial CT scan," Dr. Kim began. "There is indeed a mass in your abdomen, Margaret. It's located near your liver and appears to be quite large." Margaret's face went completely white. "A mass? What kind of mass?" William reached for her hand and held it tightly. "The imaging suggests that it's most likely a tumor," Dr. Kim continued gently. "We can't determine from the scans alone whether it's benign or malignant, so we're going to need to do a biopsy to get a tissue sample." Margaret stared at Dr. Kim for a long moment before speaking. "Are you saying I might have cancer?" "It's possible," Dr. Kim replied honestly, "but it's also possible that this is a benign growth that we can remove with surgery. We won't know for certain until we examine the tissue under a microscope." The room was completely quiet except for the sound of Margaret's heart monitor beeping steadily. William watched as his wife processed this information, her face cycling through several different expressions: confusion, fear, disbelief, and finally, a kind of grim determination. "When do we do this biopsy?" she asked finally. "I'd like to schedule it for Friday," Dr. Kim said. "That gives us tomorrow to run a few more tests and make sure you're strong enough for the procedure." "What kind of procedure is it?" William asked, finding his voice. "We'll do it laparoscopically, which means we'll make a small incision in Margaret's abdomen and use a tiny camera to guide us to the mass. We'll take several small samples of tissue and send them to our pathology lab. The actual biopsy only takes about 30 minutes, and Margaret should be able to go home the same day." "And then how long until we know?" Margaret asked. "The pathology results usually take 3 to 5 days, Dr. Kim explained. I know that seems like a long time to wait, but we want to be absolutely thorough in our analysis." Margaret nodded slowly. "Okay. What do we do now?" "Now you rest and let your body recover from the accident," Dr. Kim said. "The biopsy is a minor procedure, but I want to make sure you're feeling completely well before we do it. In the meantime, I'm going to have you meet with our patient coordinator, Jennifer. She'll explain everything you need to know about the biopsy and answer any questions you might have." After Dr. Kim left, Margaret and William sat in silence for several minutes. William was still holding her hand, and he could feel that she was trembling slightly. "Well," Margaret said finally, "that wasn't what I was expecting when I went grocery shopping on Tuesday." Despite everything, William found himself smiling a little at her comment. Even in the face of possibly having cancer, Margaret was still making jokes. That was one of the things he loved most about her. "Are you scared?" he asked gently. "Terrified," Margaret admitted. "But I'm also kind of relieved to know what's been making me feel so tired lately. I thought I was just getting old." "You've been feeling tired?" William asked, surprised. "You never said anything." "I didn't want to worry you," Margaret said, "and I thought it was just because I haven't been sleeping well. But now that I think about it, I have been more tired than usual for the past few months." William felt a stab of guilt. How had he not noticed that his wife wasn't feeling well? He lived with her every day, shared meals with her, slept in the same bed. How had he missed the signs that something was wrong? "Hey," Margaret said, seeming to read his thoughts. "Don't blame yourself. I didn't even realize it was anything serious. That's why they call cancer the silent killer. It sneaks up on you." "We don't know if it's cancer yet," William reminded her. "You're right," Margaret said. "Maybe it's just some weird, benign thing that's been sitting there for years causing no problems. Maybe they'll take it out and I'll be fine." "That's what we're going to hope for," William agreed. But even as he said the words, William had a sinking feeling that they were about to begin the fight of their lives. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medical appointments, insurance phone calls, and worried conversations with family members. Margaret was discharged from the hospital on Thursday morning, but she had to return on Friday for the biopsy. William drove her home through familiar streets that somehow looked different now. Everything seemed more precious and fragile than it had before. The old oak tree in their front yard, the roses Margaret had planted along the walkway, the little American flag hanging from their porch. All of it looked beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Their house felt both comforting and strange. Margaret walked through each room slowly, touching things like she was seeing them for the first time. She spent several minutes in their bedroom, looking at the photographs on the dresser and the books stacked on her nightstand. "It's good to be home," she said, but her voice sounded sad rather than happy. That afternoon, they met with Jennifer, the patient coordinator Dr. Kim had mentioned. Jennifer was a cheerful woman in her 40s who had been working with cancer patients for over 10 years. She explained exactly what would happen during the biopsy procedure and gave them a folder full of information to read. "The most important thing to remember," Jennifer said, "is that we're still in the information gathering phase. Until we get the biopsy results, we don't know what we're dealing with. Try not to assume the worst." But assuming the worst was exactly what William found himself doing. That night, after Margaret had gone to sleep, he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and spent hours reading about abdominal tumors and liver cancer. The more he read, the more frightened he became. The statistics were terrifying. Even when caught early, certain types of abdominal cancers had very low survival rates. The treatments were harsh and often unsuccessful. William read story after story of people who had fought bravely against cancer and lost. He also read stories of survivors, people who had been given grim diagnoses and had defied the odds. But those stories seemed less real to him somehow, less likely to apply to his situation. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Margaret was quiet during the drive to the hospital, and William could tell she was nervous. The biopsy was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and they had to arrive 2 hours early for pre-procedure preparations. The outpatient surgery center was in a different part of the hospital than the emergency room where this whole journey had started. It was brighter and more cheerful, with large windows and comfortable furniture in the waiting area. A nurse named Carol took Margaret back to get ready for the procedure. while William waited in the surgical family area. He tried to read a magazine, but the words just swam together on the page. Other families were waiting too. An elderly man whose wife was having gallbladder surgery, a young couple whose baby was having a minor procedure. Everyone looked worried and tired, but they were all trying to stay hopeful. William found some comfort in not being alone in his anxiety. Dr. Bray Kim came out to speak with him after Margaret had been taken to the procedure room. "The biopsy should take about 30 minutes, she explained. "Margaret is in excellent hands with Dr. Patterson, who does these procedures all the time. I'll come talk to you as soon as it's finished." William nodded and tried to smile. "She's nervous, but she's handling it well." "Margaret seems like a very strong person," Dr. Kim observed. "That's going to serve her well, whatever we find out." The 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. William paced around the waiting area, got coffee from the vending machine, and called Linda to give her an update. Finally, Dr. Kim appeared again with a reassuring smile. "Everything went perfectly," she reported. "Margaret did great, and we were able to get excellent tissue samples. She's in recovery now, and you can see her in about 20 minutes. "When will we have the results?" William asked. "Monday at the earliest, Wednesday at the latest. I know the waiting is difficult, but we want to be absolutely thorough in our analysis." Margaret was groggy but alert when William was finally allowed to see her. She had a small bandage on her abdomen where they had made the incision, but otherwise she looked fine. "How do you feel?" William asked, taking her hand. "Tired and a little sore," Margaret replied, "but relieved that it's over. Now we just have to wait." They went home that afternoon, and Margaret spent the weekend resting on the couch. William hovered over her constantly, bringing her tea and soup and making sure she was comfortable. He took the weekend off from his job at the hardware store, something he hadn't done in years. Linda came to visit on Sunday, bringing homemade cookies and a cheerful attitude that helped lift everyone's spirits. She and Margaret spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums and laughing at pictures from their childhood. "Remember when you decided you were going to be a professional ballet dancer?" Linda asked, pointing to a picture of 8-year-old Margaret in a pink tutu. "I was very serious about it for about 3 weeks," Margaret laughed, "until I realized how much work it actually was." William loved hearing these stories about Margaret's childhood. They reminded him that she had always been a fighter, someone who threw herself completely into whatever she was doing. If anyone could beat cancer, it was Margaret. Monday morning brought no phone call. William jumped every time the telephone rang, but it was always someone else. A telemarketer, Margaret's friend Joyce, checking to see how she was doing, someone from the insurance company with questions about her hospital stay. "Dr. Kim said it could take until Wednesday," Margaret reminded him. "Try to be patient." But patience had never been William's strong suit, and this waiting was torture. He couldn't concentrate on anything. He started 3 different projects around the house and abandoned all of them. He tried to read a book and gave up after realizing he had read the same page 4 times without absorbing any of the words. Tuesday was even worse. Margaret seemed to be handling the waiting better than William was. She worked in her garden, pulling weeds and watering her tomato plants. She made a casserole for dinner and insisted that they sit at the table and eat together like they always did. "Whatever happens, we're going to be okay," she told William over dinner. "We have each other, we have a good life, and we have people who love us. That's what matters." William nodded, but he wasn't sure he believed her. How could they be okay if Margaret had cancer? How could anything ever be okay again? Wednesday morning, William was washing the breakfast dishes when the phone finally rang. He answered it on the first ring. "Mr. Thompson? This is Dr. Kim. Could you and Margaret come in this afternoon around 2 o'clock? I have the results from the biopsy." William's heart was pounding so hard he could barely speak. Can you tell us over the phone?" "I prefer to discuss results in person," Dr. Kim replied gently. "I'll see you both at 2. The 3 hours until their appointment were the longest of William's life. Margaret tried to stay busy, but he could tell she was just as anxious as he was. They barely spoke during the drive to the hospital. Dr. Kim's office was small and comfortable, with diplomas on the walls and family photos on her desk. She gestured for William and Margaret to sit in the chairs across from her desk, then opened a folder containing several sheets of paper. "I'm going to give you the results straightforwardly," Dr. Kim said. "The biopsy confirmed that the mass in your abdomen is malignant. You do have cancer." The words hit William like a physical blow. He felt dizzy and sick and completely unprepared, even though he had been expecting this news for 5 days. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then took a deep breath. "What kind of cancer?" "It's a form of liver cancer called hepatocellular carcinoma," Dr. Kim explained. "The good news is that it appears to be contained within the liver and hasn't spread to other organs." "What does that mean for treatment?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means we have options," Dr. Kim said, and something in her tone made William look up hopefully. "Because we caught this before it spread, we can treat it aggressively. The tumor is large, but it's in a part of the liver that can be surgically removed." "Surgery?" Margaret asked. "A partial hepatectomy," Dr. Kim nodded. "We would remove the section of your liver that contains the tumor. The liver is remarkable in its ability to regenerate itself. So the remaining healthy tissue should be able to take over the functions of the part we remove." William felt the first glimmer of hope he had experienced in over a week. "What are the chances that the surgery will cure her?" Dr. Kim chose her words carefully. "When hepatocellular carcinoma is caught at this stage and successfully removed with surgery, the 5-year survival rate is quite good, around 70 to 80%. Those are much better odds than we would have if the cancer had spread. 70 to 80%. Not perfect, but not hopeless either." William felt like he could breathe again for the first time in days. "When would the surgery happen?" Margaret asked. "I'd like to schedule it for next week," Dr. Kim replied. "We don't want to wait too long, but we also want to make sure you've fully recovered from the biopsy. The surgery will take several hours, and you'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week afterward." "What are the risks?" William wanted to know. "Any major surgery carries risks," Dr. Kim acknowledged. "But Dr. Rodriguez, our liver specialist, does these operations regularly and has excellent outcomes. I'll arrange for you to meet with him tomorrow to discuss the specifics of the procedure." They talked for another 30 minutes about what to expect before, during, and after the surgery. Dr. Kim gave them more folders of information and scheduled several pre-operative appointments. When they finally left her office, William felt overwhelmed but cautiously optimistic. 70 to 80%, Margaret said as they walked to the parking garage. "Those aren't terrible odds." "No," William agreed. "They're not terrible at all." That evening, they called Linda and Margaret's other relatives to share the news. The conversations were difficult but also oddly comforting. Everyone wanted to help in some way. Linda offered to come stay with them during Margaret's recovery. Their neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, volunteered to take care of their garden, and Margaret's cousin David, who lived across the country, called to say he was flying in for the surgery. "We're not facing this alone," Margaret observed after they had finished all the phone calls. "No, we're definitely not alone," William agreed. The next week passed quickly in a flurry of medical appointments and preparations. They met with Dr. Rodriguez, who explained the surgery in detail and answered all of their questions. They met with an anesthesiologist, a nutritionist, and a social worker who specialized in helping families cope with cancer. Margaret had blood work done and more scans to make sure the cancer hadn't spread. All the tests came back clear. The cancer was still contained to the original tumor in her liver. William took time off work to be with Margaret for all of these appointments. His boss at the hardware store was understanding and told him to take as much time as he needed. "Family comes first," Mr. Franklin said. The store will be here when you get back." The night before the surgery, William and Margaret sat on their back porch and watched the sunset. They didn't talk much, but they held hands and listened to the sounds of their neighborhood, children playing in nearby yards, dogs barking, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. "I'm scared," Margaret admitted as the sky grew dark. "Me too," William replied. "But I believe Dr. Rodriguez when he says he can remove the tumor completely. And I believe Dr. Kim when she says you have a good chance of being cured." "What if something goes wrong during the surgery?" Margaret asked quietly. William turned to look at her. "Then we'll deal with whatever happens, together, just like we always have." Margaret squeezed his hand. "I love you, William Thompson. Thank you for being exactly the husband I needed during all of this." "I love you too, Margaret Thompson, and I'm going to love you for many more years to come." The surgery was scheduled for 7 o'clock the next morning. William and Margaret arrived at the hospital at 5:30. Both nervous, but trying to stay positive. Linda was already waiting for them in the surgical family area, along with Margaret's cousin, David. Dr. Rodriguez came to talk to them before taking Margaret to the operating room. He looked confident and calm, which helped ease some of William's anxiety. "The plan is to remove about 30% of Margaret's liver," he explained. "It sounds like a lot, but the liver can function perfectly well with that much removed. The surgery should take about 4 hours." Margaret was taken back to prepare for surgery around 6:15. William kissed her goodbye and told her he would see her when she woke up. "I'll be waiting right here," he promised. The 4 hours of surgery felt like 4 days. William paced around the waiting room, drank too much coffee, and tried to read the same magazine over and over. Linda and David tried to distract him with conversation, but his mind was entirely focused on what was happening in that operating room. Finally, just after 11 o'clock, Dr. Rodriguez appeared in the waiting room. He was smiling, and William felt a wave of relief wash over him. "The surgery went perfectly," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "We were able to remove the entire tumor with clear margins, which means we got all of the cancer. Margaret is in recovery now and should wake up within the next hour." William felt his knees go weak with relief. "All of it? You got all of the cancer?" "All of it," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "The pathologist examined the tumor while we were operating, and there were no signs that the cancer had invaded the surrounding healthy tissue. Based on what we found today, I'm very optimistic about Margaret's prognosis." William started to cry. He hadn't cried since his father's death 5 years earlier, but the relief and joy were too overwhelming to contain. Linda hugged him tightly while David shook Dr. Rodriguez's hand enthusiastically. "When can we see her?" William asked. "In about an hour, once she's fully awake," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "She'll be groggy from the anesthesia, but she should be able to talk to you." Margaret was pale and tired when William finally saw her, but she was awake and alert. She smiled when she saw him come into the recovery room. "How do you feel?" William asked, taking her hand carefully. "Like someone just performed surgery on my liver," Margaret said with a weak laugh. "But Dr. Rodriguez said he got all of it." "All of it," William confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "The cancer is gone, Margaret. It's really gone." Margaret closed her eyes and squeezed William's hand. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," William corrected. "You're the bravest person I know." Margaret's recovery took several weeks, but she grew stronger every day. The initial pathology report confirmed what Dr. Rodriguez had said during surgery. They had removed all of the cancer, and there was no evidence that it had spread to other parts of her body. 3 months later, Margaret's follow-up scans showed no signs of cancer anywhere in her body. Dr. Kim was pleased with her progress and said that Margaret's chances of the cancer returning were very low. "I consider you cured," Dr. Kim told them during that appointment. "We'll continue to monitor you with regular scans for the next few years, but I expect them all to be clear." 6 months after the surgery, Margaret was back to her normal activities. She was gardening again, cooking elaborate meals, and had even started taking a yoga class at the community center. The scar from her surgery was barely visible, and she rarely complained about any discomfort. William often thought about that Tuesday morning when his phone had rung and changed their lives forever. If Margaret hadn't been in that car accident, if the other driver hadn't run that red light, they never would have discovered the cancer until it was much more advanced and much harder to treat. In a strange way, the worst day of their lives had also been the luckiest. The accident that had scared them so much had actually saved Margaret's life. 1 year after the surgery, they celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary at the same restaurant where they had celebrated their 23rd. Margaret looked healthy and happy. Her hair had grown back where they had shaved it for surgery, and her color was better than it had been in years. "To second chances," William said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. "To second chances," Margaret agreed, clinking her glass against his. They had faced the biggest challenge of their marriage and come through it stronger than ever. The cancer was gone, Margaret's health was excellent, and they had learned not to take any moment together for granted. William still thought about those terrifying weeks when they didn't know what was wrong with Margaret, when every phone call from the hospital could bring devastating news. He thought about the sleepless nights in uncomfortable hospital chairs, the difficult conversations with doctors, and the overwhelming fear that he might lose the most important person in his life. But mostly, he thought about how grateful he was for every ordinary day they shared. Drinking coffee together in the morning, working in their garden on weekends, watching television on the couch in the evenings. All of these simple pleasures felt precious now in a way they never had before. Margaret was right when she had said they were going to be okay. They had each other, they had a good life, and they had people who loved them. The cancer was gone, and they had many more years ahead of them to grow old together. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be a blessing in disguise. William would never be grateful for the fear and worry they had endured, but he was grateful that Margaret's accident had led to the discovery of her cancer when it could still be cured. As they drove home from their anniversary dinner, past the intersection where Margaret's accident had happened, William reached over and took his wife's hand. "I love you, Margaret Thompson," he said. "I love you too, William Thompson," she replied. "Here's to the next 24 years. William smiled and squeezed her hand gently. He was looking forward to every single day of those next 24 years, and many more beyond that.